Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Olio and Universum webinar on the must-know student recruiting trends in the UK. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to our presenters.
Thanks, Joe. So my name's Stefan Saw, and I am based in London. I'm the Global Head of Account Management for Olio.
And good afternoon, this is Federica Leotta from Universum. I'm the Employer Branding Advisor for UK and globally. So now on to you, Stefan.
Thanks, Federica. So what are we going to talk about today? We've got some really interesting research that we've done in partnership with Universum on student recruiting trends. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a brief overview of Olio as a company for those who are learning about us for the first time. I'm going to share the Olio research, and then I'll pass over to Federica, who's going to share the Universum research. And the focus of our presentation today is on student recruiting trends globally, but also with a focus on the UK. So for those of you who may not know Olio as an organization, we have actually been a dedicated talent solutions provider for over 20 years now. You may know us from our previous name, which was World Careers Network, WCN, and we have a strong presence which we operate out of London and New York. And over that time, we've been fortunate enough to work with some amazing clients. And we've made a really, really big investment along with our rebrand into our recruitment software. So our roadmap and where we've directed our investment is very much focused on improving how we attract the right people at the right time, ensuring that we keep the level of engagement with interested candidates high and personalized, and also allowing our clients to start using the latest tools powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning to transform the way that selection process works. And in terms of who we work with a number of varied organizations in both the public and private sector. But over the years, we have built a very specific expertise within emerging talent. And subsequently, the time and investment that we've had in that space has helped shape our emerging talent solution, which is the dedicated product within the Olio suite. We've been able to use our expertise to support some of the world's leading graduate employers find the best talent, and I'm looking forward to sharing our insights today. So if we take you through the high-level context of the study, what we did at Olio was look at the recruiting season 2016-2017 across our emerging talent clients, and we analysed nearly 1 million applications, which were made in over 200 countries across a number of different industry sectors. And within that study, what we were looking at focusing in on were some key metrics and key research points in 5 different areas. So we wanted to understand how is competition shaping up for top talent? What is the environment like for students who are actually on the lookout for new roles? What's the effect of increasing competition on our objectives as recruiters? And we'll also hear the view from both clients and candidates with both studies that you'll see today. We also focused in on the fallout rate, so specifically looking at the impact of people who are dropping out of the recruitment process at application stage, also further downstream in the onboarding and offer process as well. We realized that diversity is a very, very big area of focus for a number of our clients. We produced a study on the makeup of applications as they're coming through our current client base. Mobility, specifically mobility, social mobility, we have a study which we're sharing on that. And finally, we're looking at the different breakup of university applications across different emerging talent programs. So if we just focus in on the first study, which is competition. So the first thing that we did realize from our study is competition certainly is intense in the UK emerging talent market. The number of graduates graduating each year is still on the increase. And if we look at the numbers from a global perspective and compare them to what we studied in our UK client base, around about 50,000 applicants per program, we found was the global average, and the UK came in at just under at 45,000. And if we go further down into the recruitment process and look at how screening works from a global perspective, what we found is close to 2/3 of applicants who apply for global programs were screened out, whereas in the UK, it was a rough 50-50 split. So still actually a lot more time spent and resource spent on screening. It'd be interesting to hear the views of people who are tuned in, whether this sounds familiar. From a post-screening perspective, what we found is when we got to the offer process, around 2% of applicants who were offered was screened out globally, and 1% of candidates were offered post-screening in the UK. So it's still a really, really big challenge for our client base. And it's a big reason why we've made a big investment in our intelligent selection tool. If it's something that you'd be keen to discuss further, we'd love to talk to you about the results of our studies in that area. So if we move on to the offer process, so we looked at the stats again from a global perspective. So candidates who were declining at a global level with our client base were at 25%. Candidates who were actually rejecting at the offer stage were at 3%. And the UK didn't fared quite well in comparison to the global average. So pretty much in line with what we're experiencing with all of our other customers. And if we move across to diversity, this is a really big topic of discussion, both in our key markets in the UK and also stateside. So it was really, really interesting to have a look at how this was broken up. We'll have some stats shared by Federica later on today when it comes to interviewing the male and female population, but certainly if we look across the programs that we studied in our markets here, there's still a lot of work in terms of having increased female participation in the application numbers. Still well over 2/3, 72% in fact, of applicants were coming from male candidates. We have seen some promising signs with increased female participation in STEM careers. We've got some good examples within our client base where we've seen specific promotion and campaigns promoting more female participation, but there's certainly still work to do. If we move across to a really interesting study we did, which was around the representation of universities and the application number. The first study we did was looking at the conversion ratio. So within the UK, we broadly split up applicants by Russell Group and non-Russell Group universities, and we've done a similar comparative study in the US with Ivy League and non-Ivy League applicants as well. So you can see there is a majority, 64% of applicants for UK programs have come from non-Russell Group, and 82% in the US from non-Ivy League. But if we actually move further down to the statistic, which a lot of us as recruiters are targeted on, there's a stark contrast between the two countries. So we've seen a very big representation in terms of the applicant number from non-Russell Group universities in the UK, but that conversion is much lower. So it's still a very dominant figure for Russell Group universities being accepted into programs. So that's really interesting to see. Whereas stateside, it's far more representative of the actual application population. So something to think about, and a topic which is being discussed with our clients and debated all the time. So the other study we wanted to have a look at was, particularly with the macroeconomic situation, specifically here in the UK, was just to understand a little bit more about mobility. So within lateral recruitment, we've seen, an increase on the options that professionals are willing to consider when it comes to pursuing their careers. Would we see similar trends in the graduate market? And it is really interesting to see that although the majority of placements and offers which are made for UK graduates are for UK graduates who are based in the UK, there's still very, very strong levels of interest which comes from specific hotbeds in the US, in Western and Central Europe, in Asia, specifically India and mainland China. So there is still, despite the big changes that we're waiting to hear the impact of, a lot of interest from outside of the UK in programs within these shores. So just moving on from the heat map, global heat map, it was also interesting for us to have a look at where the vast majority of successful applications came through. So the UK still accounted for 57% of the applications, but the top 5 countries outside of the UK when it came to successful program applications were France, the United States, Italy, Germany, and Spain. So certainly lots for us to think about. I think if we run this study again a year from now, it'd be very interesting to see that heat map and also to see, the split between applicants and people who are accepted onto this program. So that concludes the study from Olio. I'll now pass you over to Federica, who's going to share the Universum study.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for showing us Olio sides of things. We are now starting the Universum point of view when it comes to the Masno students recruitment trends for the UK in 2018. So I want to start with a brief overview of Universum and what we are actually doing. So Universum is an insight-driven global employer branding agency. We have been working for 30 years helping companies developing strong employer brands, and every year we run surveys globally in more than 50 countries, collecting the point of view of more than 1.5 million of students and professionals. So what we are interested in looking at is what makes an employer attractive for them. What are their long-term career goals? And when it comes to communicating and interacting with employers, what are the channels that are most used? So, of course, this kind of data can help us understand how to not only attract, but also engage talent throughout what we call the candidate touch points and employee experience. So how can we attract them? How can we make sure that they are receiving the right information about the company, and how can we make them stay throughout the process? So when it comes to this specific deck, as Stefan previously mentioned, we will have both a global and a local perspective. When it comes to the global perspective, this refers to the 1.5 million respondents that we have collected globally, 55 countries, and 5 main fields of study, meaning business, STEM, natural sciences, humanities, and law. When it comes to the UK, the data you will see in a moment comes from our more than 44,000 British students that have answered our questions from more than 130 universities and 145 areas of study. So as Stefan said before, competition is getting tougher in the sense that there are more graduates out there, but on the other hand, these graduates have also opened up for many more options. How do we know this? So one question that we ask is, how many companies would you consider working for out of a list of companies? And in 2008, they would consider an average number of 14 companies. Now, basically 10 years later, that number has increased to 21. which means that, of course, for each company is a bit more difficult to get students' attention. And on the other end, what is interesting is that they are not anymore choosing from one single industry or two of them, but there are many more industries they're picking from. So it's not anymore about the industry, but it's more about what kind of experience can this employer offer. And when we ask them what kind of aspect, what kind of elements would make an employer attractive to you, well, the truth that learning is a key priority, and it is a key priority globally. In fact, it's the #1 most attractive attribute for students all over the globe: professional training and development. They are looking for an employer that will let them grow as professionals and as people, of course. But when it comes to UK students, British students, the truth is that this is still very important. And for business students is the most important right after iFuture earnings. So yes, they're interested in the salary, but right after that, they're interested in the amount of learnings they will be able to get from the employer. When it comes to STEM students, and we know the STEM students are difficult to attract, difficult to engage, and competition is even tougher there in that arena. Still, learning is a top 3 priority, #3, right after iFuture earnings and innovation. But when it comes to learning, how do they want to learn? And the truth is that they are really looking for leadership opportunities, but even more important, they are looking for leaders that will support their development. So yes, they want to learn, but they want to find in the company a guide that will support them in this. And if you think about this, how do I showcase that in my company, there are leaders that will support the development of the new hires? The truth is that, sharing perspective of your leaders or sharing stories of how leaders have supported people that joined the company to, grow within the company environment, that's definitely a very strong way of doing it. And both leadership opportunities and leaders who will support my development are not only very important at the global level, but even locally. So in the UK, these 2 elements are in the top 5 attraction drivers for students and graduates in business and economics, STEM, health and medicine, and law. So when it comes to the ideal employer, and every year we publish rankings of the most attractive employers in each country, and we have this list for UK students as well. The truth is that the companies that are the most attractive are the ones that can offer a friendly work environment, a respectful environment, but also an environment that is creative and dynamic. So if you think about it, it's a lot about culture, the culture they will find at the company. And on top of that, these aspects are very difficult to understand if I am not within the company, if I'm not working at the company, or if I don't know anyone that is currently working there. So of course, it makes it a bit more difficult to communicate the culture, but even more important to do so in order to attract and engage them before sending that application. And when it comes to STEM students, it's interesting to note that in the UK, they are more interested in a creative and dynamic work environment rather than in the products and the services we work with. So I think, this is very important when you need to understand or prioritize what to talk about, being it a post on social media, being it on campus during a presentation. Shall I talk about what we do, or shall I really talk about how we do it? And then when it comes to generations, so another big part of what we do is also compare different generations at work. Because of course, and this is something we all find ourselves in these days, we are working in companies where there are even 4 generations soon sharing the same desk. So how do we make sure that, that we are all aligned, that we can all work together and we can all bring our own perspective and make it work for the best? So one question that we ask 4 different generations, or at least 3 different generations, what are their biggest fears when it comes to the future work. And if we look at this, these are the generations we have included. So you have Gen Z, those that were born from 1997 and below. Then we have Gen Y. Gen Y are the so-called millennials. And the truth is that today, millennials are both students. They are still studying, finishing up their university path, but they are already working. They could be even middle managers by now. And then we have Gen X. So when we ask them what's the biggest fear, you see their biggest fear, and it's very much aligned, is that they will find a job that doesn't match their personality. So once again, showcasing the culture of the company is extremely important. Second to that, getting stuck with no development opportunities. If you remember, the number one priority is learning. Learning, of course, that will allow them to develop. And then last but not least, that there will be no job security for my job generation. This is the top three. And as you can see, there's more alignment than one might thought thinking about this fourth generation. But once again, the culture piece is the most important for the younger generation. So very, very good food for thought, I think, when it comes to, what shall we talk about for our next campaign. And this is, sorry for that. This is just a recap of the different generations we've just looked at. So Gen Z, they used to be high school students, but now are also doing their bachelor, born 1997, 2002. And then Gen Y students, 1984, 1996. Gen Y professional, 1997, 2002. And then when we move to the next slide, I think that what is important to ask these Gen Z and millennials is, if we were to talk about culture of our company, what kind of aspect of this culture should match your personality? Number one is the friendliness of people. Once again, friendly. And the truth is that another trend we see is that startups are becoming more and more interesting for students. Why is that? Because if you think about it, the idea they have of a startup is a very cool places where they can, have fun while working, where people are all very open and smiley. This is the picture they have in their mind. And that's why these companies are so attracted, but also because they think that working in a startup means they will learn very fast. I think what is interesting is also number two here. Which of the following aspects of your future employees' culture should match your personality? Number two is the view on equality and diversity. So both men and women value equality and diversity at the workplace, but I think not surprisingly, women are even more sensitive to it. As Stefan was mentioning before, diversity is a big topic these days, especially in the UK. And when it comes to attracting women, so how do we get the number of women applications increasing? Well, even talking about things that are interesting and are important to them, it's a way to engage with them, to get their attention. Talking about how this company views equality and diversity is definitely something very important. But how do they define diversity? This is another big topic. So talking to companies, many times diversity is defined as gender diversity. The truth is that the topic is much bigger and broader than that. So when we ask students, and you see in green the female population, in black the male population, ethnicity is the number one definition of diversity, rightly followed by gender. So gender is not even number one actually. And then you have nationality, socioeconomic background, physical disability, and age. These are all the kind of diversity they take in account when defining the topic. Another interesting question we asked is, which aspect of diversity do you bring to a company? So in the moment in which you join this company, what plus do you bring in terms of diversity? You see gender, yes, especially for female, but the second one is personality. Once again, I want to join a company where my personality matches the culture of the company itself, because the personality is what I bring, my view of the world. So once again, this is interesting when communicating with talent. And when we ask them, do you feel that companies are doing a good job? So we also have developed what we call the Diversity and Inclusion Index to understand which companies in the UK are perceived as the more let's say, open to these topics and the ones that are actually doing more. And when it comes to actually region in the world, you see that millennials in APAC and North America perceive their companies to be very committed to diversity. And there are differences in every country, and actually Western Europe is 40% right after Africa, a little bit better than Middle East and Latin America. I think another topic, and going back to, how can we engage with the female talent out there? It's very important to understand what they're interested in. And when we compare our data, so what is more important to women compared to what's more important to men, you see that ethical standards, supports for gender equality, and inspiring purpose are the top 3. Inspiring purpose is definitely very, very important for them, in the sense that they want to know how I can contribute to the purpose of the company I'm going to be joining. And when it comes to ethnicity, then of course, if you remember, this is the second most, let's say, most popular way to define diversity in the UK. It's very important to tailor communication. So here are a few examples of what different groups of students consider as very important. When it comes to Black students, they think that commitment to diversity and inclusion is twice as important as any other ethnicity group. And this group is also the one that prioritizes the leadership opportunity. So if I'm trying to talk to them to get their attention, talking about how they can become leader at this company by sharing story of other leaders, that's a very strong and powerful way to get their attention. When it comes to Chinese students or students with a mixed background, then international career is the buzzword. There's a 10% difference in their interest compared to average students. When it comes to students with an Indian, a Pakistani, or a Bangladeshi background, then job security is something they're very concerned about. So that's something you should stress in the communication. Last but not least, Stefan was mentioning, when it comes to the university, how things might differ when it comes to RASI group. And I think not surprisingly, when we look into the data, we found the RASI group students are twice as much attracted to work for investment banks. And there's a much higher share of preference for top consultancies. So of course, if you're one of those companies, there's nothing to worry about. But then the question is, if I want to attract students that are not from the RASI group, what are they interested in? And on the other end, if you're not in the group of investment banks or consultancies, then how do I make myself noticed? How do I make myself interested for this group of students? And when we look at the data, they are more attracted to prestigious organization, challenging work and careers, performance recognition and meritocracy, and a competitive base salary. And if you think about it, the rest of the students, the overall student population, is much more concerned about the high future earnings or the security of the job. So these are differences that should be very much taken in account when communicating with students. So we talked a lot about communicating, but when we ask students, which channels do you use in order to learn about potential employers? I don't think it comes as a surprise, but both business and STEM students said that the channel number 1 is social media. So social media is the go-to channel. And actually, when we look at the composition by each channel, Facebook is still number 1. Facebook still tops the list, and Instagram is getting more and more popular. And when you see the differences in terms of kind of channel, you see the green are the digital channels, the blue are the in-person channel, and the yellow one are the print channels. And definitely digital is king. Digital is the one that is most used. So what are the key takeaways for this session? And I thank you very much for your attention. So competition is getting tougher. We saw both from the Oleo data and the Universum data that this is true today. Graduates want to learn. That's the key priority globally, but also in the UK. And they want to be supported while doing that. Company culture, very important driver when graduates select an employer. So very important to showcase what the company culture is and be very clear and transparent about it. So not to raise expectation that then you cannot possibly meet. And last but not least, very important, different groups are attracted by different drivers, meaning that tailoring your communication gives you much higher chances to actually get people's attention. So that was the last slide for me. From Universum side and Oleo side, thank you very much for your attention. And now it's question time.